reading from her non-fiction piece, A Love Letter to Penang.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Fiona Young, and I'm going to read a little bit from my short story, Love Letter to Penang, but this is actually the second time that I've written and gotten published. I wrote a book during the pandemic, which is called How to Thrive as a Misfit, and it's talking about my story, how I grew up as an immigrant child, a third culture kid in Germany, how I got bullied, and then later I was working in a very male-dominated industry. So I always felt that the sense of belonging is truly something that we need to cherish. And now I'm working with organizations and leaders to create a more inclusive workplace so everyone can thrive. I thought that writing the book was once in a lifetime, and here I am again. And thank you so much to the Malaysian Writers Society for including my short story in the milestones. A Love Letter to Penang, a mother and daughter's story of home. There is a smell to salted fish you never forget, she said, eyes narrowed in thought. Not the bad kind, the kind that tells you you are home. My mother's voice often softens when she talks about Penang. It wasn't the bustling, hipster, cafe-laden Georgetown of today, but the Penang she remembers with wooden shutters, old aunties, bicycles rattling across uneven roads, and the scent of Nonya Kueh drifted from the motorbike stall around the corner. This story isn't just hers, it's ours. For years, my mother spoke little of her childhood. It wasn't until the world stilled in 2020 during the pandemic, when I was living in Hong Kong and my parents in Penang and borders were shut, that our conversations deepened. Over Zoom calls, I thought, why not interview my parents? Why not preserve their memories for the generations to come? Like so many women of her generation, my mother never believed her story mattered. So I did what I know best. I asked, I listened, and I wrote. Penang doesn't need much of an introduction if you have experienced it. It's more than just a place. It's a feeling, a mix of sounds, smells, and textures. In the mornings, scooters buzz down the roads and birds sing from the trees. The air is thick and warm, filled with the smell of strong kopi o and toasted bread from the kopitiams on every street. My mother was born into this world. She grew up on a small lane off Carnarvon Street, in a 2-story longhouse with a slanted roof and red wooden doors that creaked like old knees. One of the first people I learned about was my grandfather. He was well known in town and ran a fishing company. He wasn't rich, my mother told me once, but people respected him. He had his own boats, he treated his workers well, and he always had a cup of kopi and a copy of Reader's Digest in his hand. Akong, my grandfather, was a true businessman. He worked with his hands, traded fish by the basket, and always smelled like the sea, like mackerel and salt water soaked into his clothes. I never had the chance to meet him. But I can picture him now, standing at the docks, squinting into the sun, binoculars around his neck, watching his boats come in from the Andaman Sea. My mother was the youngest of 6. She doesn't remember exactly how many people lived in that house. Too many to count, she laughs. But what she does remember is the rhythm of life there. Every morning, Ama, my grandmother, boiled water for kopi and made porridge. The air well in the middle of the house was always damp, with laundry hanging above and the occasional stray cat wandering through. I used to sit on Akong's lap, she told me once, eyes shining. Even when he was busy, he always made time for me. I think I was his favorite. That was life on Toaka Lane. It wasn't fancy, but it was full of life. Growing up in Germany, I didn't feel the sun of Penang on my skin. I had rain in my hair and classmates who tugged at the corners of their eyes to mock mine. I spoke German like a local, but people didn't treat me like one. When we visited Malaysia for the school holidays, I still didn't fit in. I was called a banana, yellow on the outside, white on the inside. I laughed at jokes too late. struggled to speak Chinese, and got quiet scoldings for not knowing how to hold chopsticks properly. But in Penang, there were small moments of comfort. I remember visiting Amma and sleeping beside her. She would let me have the bed while she slept on the floor. Every morning, she was the first to wake, and after hanging up the laundry, she would take me on a rickshaw to the wet market. She'd proudly show me off to her friends and buy me little snacks. Those mornings with her, just the two of us, are memories I'll always hold close. I never fully belonged anywhere, but in the corners of Penang, I started to see little pieces of myself. Growing up in Germany, my parents worked long hours at our Chinese restaurant. We didn't have slow breakfasts or dinner chats. We had schedules, school runs. The rhythm of our lives was built on keeping up. When I moved to Hong Kong in 2010, I felt right at home in a city that ran on urgency. People moved fast, talked fast, and lived fast. I became a corporate high achiever, collecting job titles like souvenirs. I thrived on deadlines, on KPIs, and the intoxicating sense of being in control. But the faster I ran, the more I felt something slipping away. Every time I returned to Penang, something shifted. I'd sit at a hawker stall with my parents, peeling prawns, dipping them into sauce with my fingers, licking it off without a napkin in sight. The more I listened to my mother's childhood stories, the more I saw how much of her had gone unnoticed. Not because people didn't care, but because girls like her were expected to stay in the background, be helpful, be polite, and be quiet. She was smart, curious, and full of life, but no one ever asked her what she wanted to be. No one told her she could be more. When I rose in my career, becoming the youngest head of operations in a Fortune 500 company, I thought I had changed the story. I thought I had broken the cycle. I was sitting at the table that girls like my mother never were invited to. But even at that table, I didn't always feel seen. I was often the only woman, the only Asian, the youngest in the room. People asked where I was really from. They praised me for my English. They assumed I was quiet or submissive. Sometimes I wondered, did they see my talent or just tick a diversity box? That is the diversity token dilemma. Some days it felt like I had to work twice as hard to prove I deserved to be there. Other days, I questioned if the seat was ever truly mine. But then I remembered my mother. She didn't have the titles or the spotlight, but she showed strength in 100 quiet ways. Her resilience lived in the things she carried and the dreams she never spoke about. I don't need to belong to one place anymore. Not Germany, not Penang, not Hong Kong. Because belonging isn't geographic. It is where your heart is. And now, in my early 40s, I've come full circle. I've moved to Penang not just for the slower pace, but to be close to my parents. My son was born here. He gets to spend quality time with his Amma, who sneaks him snacks and tells him stories. He calls my dad Opa, German for grandfather. He's growing up between cultures, just like I did, but with more roots, more stories, and more love spoken out loud. This story is stitched from our virtual conversations during the pandemic, from my mother's memories and my reflections. It is a love letter to Penang, to migration, to the misfits who straddled cultures, and to the women who quietly held generations together. My mother may never write a book, but she lived one. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona. So our third reader for today is Ellen Estudo, reading from Smaller Sons.
Yeah.